Hey guys, welcome back. I wanted to do a short video to kind of show you what's going on right now in my handicapping world. I got an email earlier this morning, and actually it was sent last night, but I received it this morning. And the user, and when I mean user, I mean he's a pace progression user, and he hit me with a very valid question, okay? And it's actually an issue that comes about a lot when analyzing the grid. And to paraphrase the question, essentially what he was alluding to was, what do you do when you got a lot of different things going on your grid? Outside of having to rely on the horse that has the most blue, which means the top ranking. A lot of times the top ranking will point you to the favorite or second choice, which is, in a sense, it's good because it's telling me the data that we're using paceline wise is pointing me in the right direction. The public's seeing the same thing I'm seeing, but that's not always what we want to do. Okay, this is all good when you're looking to single a horse in a horizontal, such as a double, pick 3, pick 4, or whatever. But the question arose, and you think about it, this horse is not, this 8 horse, for example, here, showing up in blue in the most categories, including the overall, the 2 summative categories here. It's not always going to win the race. And you want to be able to land on that horse that beats that favorite. And using this potential model, I felt by reading his questions a couple times over, I'm thinking, you know what? I think that one of the issues here is we do all our work in our working grid, and everything in the working grid is dealing with numbers, right? Factors, values, and then when we get over here, we actually ignore the specific values and we just look for the top number and we identify first, second, third, fourth, and so on. And then we move on to the next category, which gives us a very bright picture here when determining, okay, where are we going to go from here? Now, as mentioned before, if you're tracking bias at a certain track, you could lean toward the late horse, such as I did here in this particular race the other day, the 13, who actually I think won the race at the mile 16th on the turf. But at the same time, you're not always, if you want to play multiple tracks, you're not always familiar with what the bias is, how the track's running that week, or so forth. And the last thing you want to do, well, I shouldn't say the last thing you want to do, because I know there are people out there that do it, is to just watch the first half of the card to see how things are going, and then play the second half of the card based on the bias that you're seeing. Some people will do that. I, for one, will not do that. I'm a recreational player. I play mainly on the weekends. I handicap during the week to check out the factors and the model. But at the same time, I really only reach into my pocket pretty much on the weekends. The second part of the question was, when you have a situation such as this here, the 2, the 8, the 13, do I ever decide to pass the race when there's something when I'm just like scratching my head, the 6 horse here? No, I don't, because I'm expecting the grid to point me in multiple directions and not just to one. Because again, if it points me to one, it's probably going to be chalky. So I want the grid to give me 4 or 5 horses so I can decide who am I going to, that way I know who I'm going to use deeper in verticals in the second legs and third legs. Gives me a choice of horses for win value. So I might see that the 8 horse here in this race and the 13 are both chalk. And I might say, I'm going to put a small win bet on the 2 horse and the 6 horse, who are 6-1 and 10-1 respectively, and take it from there. But back to what I was saying before about the values. When we get to this point here and I start analyzing the grids, I'm not really paying attention to these values other than looking at who's the highest. So I can mark in blue who's the second highest, without really diving into the separation between the two. We have 3 categories on early. This was another part of his question here. He had said, which of the 3 categories in the early portion of the race, EA, EB, or EC, do you lean more towards? It's a great question, because you may have a horse that's tops here, doesn't show up here. Like, for example, the 2 horse is tops in EA, doesn't show up in EB when you start factoring in the race shape, and then boom, shows up second when you start factoring in the Briz pace numbers. And you say, okay, well, you compare the 2 to the 8. Do I lean to the 8 because he's showing up in all 3 categories? Or do I give the 2 the benefit of doubt because he's got the highest 93 out of all the places that these 2 horses are showing up? Great question. So what I did was I've added what I call the cumulative grid over here. I've added an additional grid that's going to help break down the summary grid here. Now, I am not completely getting rid of this summary. I'm just experimenting here, okay? This is Saratoga 2 for tomorrow on 7/21. And the 7 horse in the summary grid is a standout to me, okay? This is a 1 1/8. It's a standout to me color-wise. But when you look over here, what the cumulative grid does now, I have an early progression rating, a mid progression rating, and I have a summative progression rating. And the summative is taking into account the 3 summary categories. And then I have an overall progression rating. And I'm going to tell you what they are right here. The early progression rating now is taking the guesswork out. It's averaging the 3 columns found in the early portion of the race, and it's giving me a number. So indeed here, it's kind of obvious because this was first in all 3, so it's going to be the highest average. But when you get a situation like the one I showed you before, where we have a horse showing up first in one category and doesn't show up at all in the next, and might show up third in the next one, this is going to tell you what that average is. So this, without having with your naked eye to look at the actual values, 93.5, 85.5, this cumulative grid is doing it for you. It's averaging it out, and it's telling me the 7 could possibly have the early advantage in this race. On the lead, I don't know. You'd have to look at the PPs, see what the running style is, identify that. And, you know, that's something that you could do as well. You go back and you say, okay, now I see the 7 has an early advantage. Is the 7 going to be on the lead? He may be, he may not be. He may be running against just much superior pace early and on this pace line. But you look and you say, okay, well, he was sitting in 3rd out by a length. Okay? Doesn't mean he won't be on the lead today. So that doesn't necessarily mean this is the horse is going to be in the front. Okay? And then I move over here to my middle progression rating. What that's doing is taking these values now. And it's averaging them 2 out. Because a lot of times, and this race here is pretty cut and dry. We have the top, we have the second, and we have the 3rd in both categories. But there are times where you have a top in finals and 3rd in turn when you add the turn in. And then you have one that's 3rd here, and then he's 1st when you add the turn in. This here will average it out for you, taking those values, actual values, in consideration, and tell you, based on the pace lines that you're using, again, because you're always at the mercy of the pace line, who is showing the best performance from the start of the turn to the finish of the race, again, off of the pace line that you're using. And then we have the 3 summative categories, averaged together to give you a final average over here. And then what I did from there is I made an overall progression rating, which is averaging all 3 of these out to give you. So a shortcut I'm going to keep my eye on is, how accurate is this here? Because this over here, this overall progression rating, in a nutshell, is telling you everything you need to know about these numbers. And these numbers are telling you everything you need to know about these numbers, and on and on. The summary grid is telling you everything you need to know about the data that you inputted into your working grid. So I'm hoping that this here is giving us a nice little shortcut, if you want to call it, or something you could just pull out of your pocket and look at real quick and say, okay, I'm going to look 7. What's the odds on the 7? Ooh, 7's got 4-1 odds. That's worthy of a win bet, or maybe it's not to you, or whatnot. But then you got to base things on around how you wager and how you bet, and so forth. This one, again, is pretty cut and dry. This cumulative grid is telling me the same thing that this summary grid is telling me. I could see this summary grid is telling me that the 4 does indeed have the best fraction and, or I'm sorry, finish and turn finish, as I could see over here too. Okay, it's going to be obvious. First, he's going to have the top. There. Okay, but you will stumble upon races such as I copy and pasted this grid into a few races today. Let me find one that stands out to me. If I can, let me go down to the bottom of the page here. Sorry. Okay, Del Mar and Saratoga. I put some races in today. I actually played 4 races. I hit a double in one. I'm going to show you that race. But I hit the double before I used the cumulative grids. I threw the cumulative grids in to see what's going to happen here and what it's going to tell me. So let me go down to a race that I want to show you that was... all right, here's one. For example, summary grids are somewhat all over the place when you're looking at just the colors. And again, I hate to use the word colors because it makes it sound too simple, but the rankings. Okay, but I want you to make sure that you knew I'm alluding to colors when I say the rankings. When I look at the rankings here, this is kind of all over the place, right? But I go over to here, and it kind of puts a little more in perspective. It does put the 4-horse tops in the overall category due to the early part of the race and due to the summative. And it puts the 3-horse in first or in second due to mainly the middle portion. So I put the 3-4 as top tier plays here. And the 3 actually won the race at 6-1. It came out 3-2. We did not have the 2. Either grid, summary or cumulative, really wouldn't have pointed us to 1 unless we really, really reached out deep. There was just too much going on with some other horses here for me to get to that 2. But at the same time, we did pull a 6-1 winner out there. And when we go up to this race here at Saratoga, which was race 10, and this is the one I hit the double on. Let's go to this 9th race first. The 2-horse tops overall here, and tops in early here on the 9-horse. Second in early. This grid is kind of pointing me in the same direction as the cumulative grid, but at the same time, I ranked these 2, 6, 5, 9, and I based it straight off the overall 2, 6, 5, even though I didn't identify the 9. The 9 would have been my 4th choice over here. And I played a double 2, 6 over the 8. And as you can see, the 8-horse, which is a standout here, won this race at 5-1, the 10th race. So I had the 2-8 double, paid $28. Ticket cost me $2, and I got a $28 double for that. So what I'm doing is tomorrow I'm playing around with Saratoga, and I'm going to just see what the cumulative grids only, what direction do they point me to. And then when I'm done, I'm going to compare. If I did not have this grid, would I have had that horse over here? Was he that much of a standout? Or was he just a horse that showed up here and there And really, it came down to having this particular grid here. All right, so we'll see how many cut and dry races there are. When I say cut and dry, I'm talking about the summary grid pretty much matches the cumulative grid, and how many grids, cumulative grids, I can come up with where horses that are finishing first or second are kind of hidden over here because we're not taking into consideration the actual quantity of the values. All right, and I will obviously be giving a recap. I'll put another video out. I don't know how many races I'm going to do tomorrow. They have to fit my handicapping. If they don't, I'm just going to move on to another one. But I'm imagining I'm going to be able to get at least 5 races out of tomorrow's card. All right, thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk to you soon.